Hello, I'm Ben Fisher, Head of External Communications at the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and I'm joined today by Julie Brannan, who's our Director of Education and Training. And today we're going to be talking about the Solicitors Qualifying Exam, or SQE, and costs. And this is something we get a lot of questions about, particularly from aspiring solicitors, as they want to know how much this is going to cost them, but also actually it's of interest to anyone who's in the legal profession because people want to understand what training will likely cost, what it would cost to qualify as a solicitor. So today we're going to be running through those themes, and obviously the main reason we're introducing the SQE is it's all about consistent standards, but everyone is going to want to know what the costs are so they can make informed choices around how they qualify and how they train. So I suppose a good place to start, Julie, would be what's the potential problems with the current system, or how does the current system work in terms of costs?
Yeah, so two things really. First of all, it can be really expensive to qualify under the existing system. Everybody knows that it costs these days £9,250 a year for your degree. Most of the people who come through to admission as a solicitor at the moment have either a law degree or a non-law degree and a conversion course year. It's a course called the Graduate Diploma in Law. So that all costs. Everybody has to do the legal practice course, and the legal practice course can be really expensive. It can cost up to about £17,000 for the 1 year course, and obviously on top of that you've got to live, you've got to survive, so that's an awful lot of money for people to find in order to be able to qualify as a solicitor. But it's not actually just about the absolute cost, it's also about what we tend to call the LPC gamble, and that's the risk that you may go all the way through the process, you may get your law degree, you may pass the LPC, but you may then get stuck, and that's perhaps because you can't find a training contract, because you need to spend 2 years in training in a law firm before you can be admitted as a solicitor, and if you can't find a training contract, then even though you've got all the right academic qualifications, you can't progress. And the way the system's set up at the moment, people will start, or many people will start the LPC paying all that money up front without being sure whether they are going to get a job at the end of it.
And presumably some people won't even pass the LPC, so again they've taken a bit of a gamble, and if they don't pass they've had a lot of, sort of eggs in one basket.
Yeah, so absolutely, so people can get stuck along the way, but then also there will be people who will just give up and never try and say that looks too risky for me, and they may well be very talented, bright, able people, but they just think that's too risky for me. I can't easily find the money, or if I can, I'm not sure I want to risk it without being sure that I can find a way to admission with those qualifications.
And that's the LPC gamble's not such a problem, obviously, if you get a training contract. Some people get a training contract early doors, don't they? And then they may get their training paid for.
So that's right, and it's quite interesting. I saw some statistics the other day which suggested that for people doing the full-time legal practice course, when they enrolled to take the legal practice course, about 29% nationally had a training contract at that stage. So that's an awful lot of people who haven't got a training contract who are having to take a risk. And I don't have statistics for the part-time LPC, but I would expect that the numbers starting a part-time LPC without a training contract are probably lower. So that's a lot of people who end up having to take the LPC gamble. So
let's move on to the SQE then. And I suppose there's sort of two parts to this, isn't it? Because actually, whereas the LPC you're paying for both your training and the assessment all in sort of one lump sum, it's slightly different, isn't it, with the SQE? So shall we start with, there's a cost to take the exam of SQE1 and then the second part, SQE2?
Yep, so SQE has two parts to it. SQE1, which is a test of candidates' functioning legal knowledge, and SQE2, which is a test of their legal skills. And the assessment is separate to the training. So you're right, there's a cost for the assessment first of all, and separately a cost for training. And we have given some indicative figures on costs that we've published. We will finalise those costs once we have finished going through all the stages of the testing and development of the SQE. But to give people, if you like, a ballpark figure, and I've written them down carefully so I don't get them wrong, the estimate for SQE1 is that it might cost in the region of £1,100 to £1,650. And SQE2 is more expensive because it's skills and there's some one-to-one assessment. That might cost between £1,900 and £2,850. So in total assessment costs are between £3,000 and £4,500. And again, just to stress, that's indicative. In the end, the assessment cost might be a bit more or a bit lower than that, but that's just to give people a ballpark figure.
And we'll be in a better position to know what those potential costs are sometime next year, is that?
Yes, by about halfway through next year, when we've completed all the testing of the SQE and we have worked out exactly the form and shape of the assessment.
So that's the assessment cost, so that's the money you've got to pay to take it, but of course there's going to be costs of training on top of that. Do you want to talk through how that might differ? Because there's quite a few different options you can do, isn't there?
So part of what we want to do with SQE is give people lots more options about how they train. And we can see already that through training providers beginning to work out the courses that they are going to offer, that there are going to be lots of different courses, lots of variety in training routes, which we think is a very good thing. But of course, lots of variety means lots of different cost points. And part of the challenge, I think, for people coming through is that, you know, it's worthwhile doing a little bit of work to check out the options that are now opening up for you, because some will be more expensive, some will be cheaper, and that's a good thing. We want there to be variety, and we want there to be lots of different ways to train, and that means lots of different price points.
So could you talk us through what's one of the more affordable ways to train?
Yeah, let's start off there. So one option is that you go to a university who has decided to include SQE1 training as part of their law degree. So they will take you through a traditional academic curriculum, but they will integrate into that the training and preparation that you need to be ready to take SQE1, the Functioning Legal Knowledge Test. So that means no extra preparation costs over and above what you're already paying for your law degree. Then you might go and get the new form of training contract that we will call qualifying work experience, and that can prepare you really nicely for the skills element. You know, when you're working in the office, you'll be learning how to write letters, how to interview clients, how to do legal research. Those are the sort of things that we will assess in SQE2, and therefore you can prepare really well for SQE2 through your qualifying work experience. And again, no extra costs. So potentially that route doesn't entail any extra costs over and above the assessment. Similarly, if you do an apprenticeship, the apprenticeship funding covers the cost of training and the cost of assessment. Another option is, for example, the big accountancy firm Deloitte has said publicly that it is going to be offering a training program for solicitors that are employed by Deloitte, which will include all their work experience and all their SQE preparation and assessment costs. So again, for the individual, that's a cost which doesn't require anybody to pay any extra money. So those all look like really good routes to admission, which are affordable for individual people coming through who want to qualify as a solicitor. Some universities will say SQE1 preparation is not for us. We are an academic organisation. We know about the academic study of law, and students who choose to go to those universities will then need to take, we would expect, an SQE top-up course, so there'll be some additional cost for that. Again, there may be additional costs for somebody who decides to do a training course for SQE2 preparation. And again, there are beginnings of some indicative pricing out there. One organisation, Barbary, that trains for the New York Bar, has suggested that it would offer both assessment and tuition costs, all in all about £10,000 to £11,000. So that's
SQE1 training and SQE2 training, and then if you add on the cost of taking the assessment, that's about £11,000. Yeah.
All in all, training and tuition for both stages of the SQE, about £11,000. So still, you know, 2/3 of the price of the expensive LPCs. We also know that some universities are going a different route. They're saying, well, we're going to offer a new, very big, comprehensive postgraduate degree that's going to prepare you for practice as a solicitor and prepare you for the SQE, but it's also going to cover lots of other things. It's going to cover legal tech, it's going to cover project management, business awareness, lots of other really, really useful skills for life as a solicitor. Those may be more expensive because they're including lots of things in the package. So you can see how the training market is really gearing itself up with lots of options which will cost more or less, but which all look like really good ways to qualify as a solicitor.
Now, that's really interesting. It sounds like there's lots of options there, but is there a risk that you end up with potentially different tiers of training? So some people seeing the type of training as a gold standard route and some maybe as, you know, silver and bronze. Is that a risk? Because that is currently can be a problem with the current system. Is that going to be recreated through this?
So it certainly can be a problem in the current system, and what we would say in response to that is that SQE is a single standard and a single consistent standard that everybody takes, and therefore everybody is able to demonstrate their fitness to practice as a solicitor on a fair and comparable basis against their peers. And actually what we think it does is that it gives people the potential to show that even though they perhaps have come through an innovative route, let's say an apprenticeship, they have qualified to a standard which is the equivalent of people who've come through more tried and tested traditional routes. So we think actually it gives that marketability, if you like, to people who come from different backgrounds, similarly different universities. Some universities might be less fashionable than others, and again this gives people the opportunity to demonstrate that no matter how they've trained, which of the routes they've come through, they have been assessed as fit to practice because they've all taken the same comparable assessment.
And that sounds good, but I know one thing that in the recent SQE pilot on SQE1 that you ran earlier this year, generally those students who had come through Russell Group universities generally performed better in that. So will, in reality, we see, you know, that opening up of the market, or will actually there be that deferral to, you know, the tried and tested universities through the SQE?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Ben, and we did see that pattern on the recent pilot, and in a sense, I guess, you know, there will be some very able students in those universities, and so it's not necessarily a surprise. What I would say is, just because you've gone to one of those universities, that doesn't mean to say that you are automatically very able and will automatically do well in the SQE. And likewise, perhaps just because you go to a less fashionable university, you may be very able and very talented as well and may do very well on the SQE. And the SQE gives people that opportunity for people to shine who've gone to perhaps less prestigious universities to study their law, and ditto the people who've gone to the more prestigious universities can't rest on their laurels.
Yeah, and that can be a problem, can't it, currently for law firms when they're recruiting. When you don't have a consistency of assessment, it can be harder for them to judge on a sort of apples for apples basis, can't it? And sometimes I think we've heard of law firms sometimes looking at A-level results or the type of university someone's going to, which again risks a candidate maybe who's very talented and very able, missing the boat, so to speak.
Well, there's been a lot of coverage in the press about how there's grade inflation in universities, so that makes it harder for employers to judge what a first or a second class or 2-1 or a 2-2 degree means, both actually between different universities, but between somebody who did a law degree perhaps 3 or 4 years ago and somebody who's just graduated. It makes that decision and comparability much harder. So you are right that we do know that people sometimes tend to rely on A-levels, and of course the problem with A-levels is that they will almost always be quite a long time quite old and have been taking quite a long time before somebody applies for a job in a law firm. And secondly, they may be on completely different topics. They're unlikely to represent the competencies that we say that you need to practice effectively as a solicitor.
So let's go back to the point, we've talked quite a lot about sort of cost and different tiering, but what about the LPC gamble, which we said it is one of the problems in the current system? How is the SQE changing that dynamic? How is it tackling that problem?
Yeah, so I think we have to talk through sort of quite carefully what a route to admission might look like in the future under SQE. So at the moment, as we've described, somebody might emerge from a law degree and then go and do the LPC, and they have to make a decision about whether to commit to several £1,000s of expenditure to take their LPC. In the future, they may come out of a university and already have done their SQE preparation. They will still have to decide that they are going to attempt SQE 1. We've seen that might be in the region roughly of £1,500. So that's the extent of their gamble. They will either pass or they will fail that assessment, but that's what they are gambling at that point, instead of up to £17,000 on the LPC.
And that's the point, is it? Because we don't, £1,500 will be a lot of money to a lot of people. So that is still a potential barrier, but yet it's nothing like the size of the gamble you're having to take at the moment.
Yes, and there may also be tuition costs if you've gone to university that doesn't include SQE1 training, but they are going to be much lower and split between SQE1 and SQE2. So if that's where you are, again, it's likely to be, we don't have exact figures for that at the moment, but it's likely to be, really significantly less than the cost of the whole of the LPC at the moment. So that if you do get through SQE1 in the new system, then the new style qualifying work experience is easier to find than a period of recognised training, because it can include employment, for example, as a paralegal. So there should be more jobs available which will count towards qualifying work experience. And then, of course, you've got to pass your SQE2 at the end of that. But provided you do that, the necessary steps along the route should be easier to meet. And the risk, if you like, is spread. It's not an all for nothing around whether you manage to pass the LPC and then get a training contract.
I suppose one question on the back of that is, that sounds good that you're getting that, you're spreading your risk out, you get the chance to earn as you learn. But is the SQE going to be easier? Is it going to be tougher? Are you less likely or more likely to pass it than the current LPC? Because obviously that's something people would have to factor into their decisions as well. Yeah,
and it's not intended to be more difficult or easier. It's intended to represent about the same standard, but to be a consistent standard. And we've done a big piece of work to publish a description of what the standard is, about what the content is. We consulted widely on that about 3 or 4 years ago, and the profession was very content with that. So it's all very transparent, and all the people who will write the questions, moderate the questions, mark the assessments, all of those people will be qualified solicitors who know what the standard is required for to practice as a day one solicitor.
So we can expect some people won't pass, like any exam. What's the deal with resits with the SQE? And because obviously presumably that will cost more money if you have to resit exams.
That's right. You can take up to 3 resits of any element of the LPC, but the cost that I talked about at the beginning,
or the SQE,
I beg your pardon, my wrong words, of the SQE. So you can resit up to 3 elements of the SQE. The costs that I quoted a moment ago are for 1 sit. So if you have to do resits, then you will have to pay additional costs for those resits.
Okay. And just on that, so SQE 1's made up of, at the moment, on the functioning legal knowledge side, a couple of different assessments. So do you have to take both of those again, or can you pass one?
You can pass one, and if you pass one and fail one, you can bank what you have passed for up to 6 years, and as long as you pass all the elements within 6 years, then you can take each of those elements up to 3 times.
Okay, that's really useful. So let's move on to the question of funding.
Yeah.
So under the current system, there is sort of loans and funding available to both take law degrees, but also then for the LPC. What's the situation with the SQE?
So the situation with the SQE is that anybody who goes to university and does SQE prep as part of an undergraduate degree or a postgraduate degree will qualify for student loan funding in the current way. However, it's also the case that student loan funding doesn't cover private providers, so commercial providers who offer training which isn't associated with a degree qualification, nor does it cover courses run by universities which aren't awarded, don't get a degree award. So there are some limitations on that loan funding there, and likewise student loan funding won't cover the standalone costs of the assessment as opposed to the training.
So under the SQE as it stands at the moment, people might be having to self-fund a bit more. What should they do? Take out loans themselves? Or?
Yeah, so student loan funding may not be available, but obviously commercial loans will be available. We've talked about how there's more opportunity to earn while you learn, so people may be able to fund this more through their earnings as they go through. The cost of the assessment and the cost of the SQE is much more spread over time, so that should make it more affordable. And we know from some employers that employers will pay the costs of SQE assessment and training for people who are already employed by them. So particularly if you do SQE2 during your period of qualifying work experience, it may be that some employers take the decision to pay the costs of that.
Okay. And as I understand, the decision around where you can get student loans and for what that's one that sits with government. Is there likely to be any shifting on that? I think there's ongoing conversations.
So ongoing conversations with government around that. Time will tell whether government decides that this is a priority for them, but certainly we're talking to government about it.
And so I suppose we also know that there's some people who are going to fall in this sort of halfway house between they could qualify under the current route, taking the LPC, or they could qualify under the new route, say the SQE, and that's, for instance, if they'd started a law degree before 2021. So what would your advice be to those people if they're weighing up the decision, well, will SQE cost more? Will it be easy to get qualifying work experience, or should I do the LPC route?
So the first thing I guess to say is that if you're in the lucky position that you have been offered a training contract under the old system, then you should take that training contract, particularly if it offers funding for the legal practice course. You've got a pathway through, and really take advantage of being in that nice position. Second thing to say is go and talk to your law firm. Your law firm may say to you, it's early days yet, but as time progresses, actually we're interested in people coming through the SQE, and this is what we do. Or they may say we don't mind whether you do SQE or the traditional route. So talk to the law firm, talk to employers who you're approaching, as part of the recruitment process, to find out what their position is on whether they want their future joiners to come through the old or the new route, or whether they don't mind. If you don't yet have a training contract, then do remember that the SQE route may be cheaper, and also that it opens up the option of qualifying work experience, which may be easier to find than a traditional training contract. So there are those options there which are worth thinking about.
So for instance, if you were considering a law degree and if someone was starting next year, that would just about mean they could do both options. But we know, for instance, some law degrees offer sort of work years out in business or experience in a law clinic, and that might be able to count to qualifying work experience if you went the SQE route in a way that it might not for the LPC.
Yes, particularly, certainly I think lots of universities these days have very good law clinic provision. Some universities also do 4-year sandwich degrees where you get a whole year working in a law firm. And the advantage of that in terms of qualifying work experience is that can count as one of your 2 years of qualifying work experience. So you've got a whole year under your belt if you go the new route, whereas at the moment it doesn't count towards a training contract.
And I suppose at this point I should do a shout out that if you're wondering, well, what does qualifying work experience count as, count as. Me and Julie did a webinar just a couple of weeks ago, which you should find on our YouTube channel if you want to find out more about that. So I suppose to finish off, then, what would your advice be if someone is going to be qualifying through the SQE route? What type of things should they be considering in terms of weighing up their options? Because we've talked about there's a lot of options there. We don't want them to be overwhelmed. What should they do?
Yeah. So I think certainly if you're thinking about going the university route, talk to your universities about how they are adapting to the advent of SQE. What does it mean for the law degree that they offer? What do they offer by way of law clinics? You know, do they offer placements in practice? Do they offer sandwich degrees? So talk to the university about the type of law courses that they are offering. Think about apprenticeships. If you're still at 18 and you're thinking about university or apprenticeships, remember that you can qualify through both routes. Yeah. Both routes are open if you want to end up as a solicitor.
If you really want to be a solicitor but money is very, very tight, that's a way to potentially...
The apprenticeship route is really good because it's entirely funded. You don't have your university fees to pay, you don't have any SQE fees to pay, it's totally funded, and you have, you are earning throughout the period of the apprenticeship, so it's a very attractive model. So certainly think about all of that. Certainly talk to law firms, talk to law firms about what they're thinking about, what routes they are looking to recruit people through. Are they interested in apprenticeships? Are they offering apprentices? What about working as a paralegal? Are they interested in offering jobs as a paralegal, which may give you an opportunity just to get a sense of whether this really is something for you before you commit to a full-blown apprenticeship or a full-blown degree course. Of course, the third big option is to think about doing another sort of degree and then qualifying as a lawyer afterwards. So you might go and do a science degree, you might go and do a history degree, whatever it is, but you will still be able, once you have graduated from that, to do training courses to prepare you for SQE1 and SQE2 and qualify at that point. So if you are a really, you love your history and you really want to do history at university, then don't think you can't go down that route as well.
And quite a lot of law firms like to have a bit of diversity there, don't they, in terms of not everyone having studied law right from the start, because actually there's skills and knowledge you can gain from other types of degrees that can be very valuable.
It's one of the big characteristics of the English solicitor profession that these days probably about 30 or 40% of solicitors qualify without a law degree, but
including yourself,
including me. Yes, yeah. So there you are. Yes.
Well, what better or worse note to finish on than that? So thank you everyone for tuning into this. If you have any follow-up questions, best place to probably go is to our Facebook Career in Law page, where if you put a comment or direct message question on there, we'll try and answer it for you on costs or anything else. And we'd also, of course, feel free to leave your comments. We always like to know whether the material we're covering is useful or if you have further questions. But otherwise, thank you very much and enjoy Christmas.